um, one of my favorite topics, and it's just because everything in the world, more so, and it still kind of continues over today, started in World War II. And World War II lasts 6 years, really. We get involved in 41, so we're only in there for 4. We're going to take this from an outside point looking in. To this point, we've stayed really United States because this is U.S. history. So these first 2 videos here, we're going to talk about what's going on in the world during the Depression, because the Great Depression was not an isolated incident in the United States. Everyone suffered, and you should have got that from world history. The Great Depression was felt by everyone. And so we're going to talk about a few things here and kind of set the stage here for some other things, all right? So this is America and the world during the Depression. This first part, we're going to talk about the dictators and a few other things, okay? Now, in the rise of, during the war here, we have the idea of what is called a totalitarian state, or totalitarianism. The key word there being total, right? Total all control, okay? Now we have authoritarianism, meaning there's one authority. You have the word single, one person. Regime, which means you use the military. Political state, total authority, power. There is no private public. Usually you have monopolizes. One person dominates the citizen thing. And so there are a couple things there. Now, generally speaking, with these regimes, they are accompanied by secret police. The Nazis had the Gestapo. Mussolini had his brown shirts. Stalin in Russia had his. And so these secret police are police that work for the regime. They're not the typical police. They're kind of paramilitary, meaning they have military skills, and they're there to enforce the rules of not necessarily the country, but of that person. And so it's the way to keep power suppressed and keep people down. Okay? Now we're going to talk about the first authoritarian state to pop up, and it is not Hitler. It's the one that Hitler based his thing off. It is Benito Mussolini. Now, Benito Mussolini is a dictator in Italy. He sets up a totalitarian state in Italy. And Italy, what's the biggest city people think of in Italy? Well, how about the capital of Rome? And when you think back to Rome, you think of the Roman Empire. Here, he even has the Roman eagle on his insignia, correct? And the Roman Empire in world history was massively great. And so what Mussolini wants to do is bring back the power of that Roman Empire, which is based on militarism. And so that's interesting because now we have the rise of these military states. Now, he bases his totalitarian thing, he gets it together, and he comes up with a new idea called fascism. Now, fascism was given because the name of his political party was actually Fascisio de Combattimento, which means the party of fighting, the party of combat. And so they took that Fascisio and turned it into fascism. All right? Now, what are some attributes of fascism? Powerful continuing nationalism. You have a disdain or a hatred for human rights. You identify an enemy or a scapegoat as an underlying cause. That's really good in Hitler. Hitler had found a scapegoat as the Jew. All right? Supremacy of the military. Rampant sexism, meaning males are more important than females. You control the mass media, what is being said and heard. You have an obsession with national security. You kind of intertwine religion and government. Corporate power is protected. Labor power, unions, is put down. You have a disdain, again, hatred for intellectuals and the arts. You have an obsession with crime and punishment, thinking that you should be judge, jury, executioner. You have rampant cronyism. That means you have a lot of people working for you, and corruption. And you have fraudulent or fake elections. These are early warning signs of fascism, and they're happening everywhere. The real thing that I really want you to understand what fascism is it's an extreme nationalism. You have a scapegoat, and ultimately it's supremacy of the military are the big things there. So Italy is going to be the first one to do this. Now, in this, there is a young man who served in World War I as a trench runner. I'm talking about Adolf Hitler. He was not a soldier. He kind of ran between the trenches. He joins up a kind of fledgling political party in there. He did not create it. It was actually there. It was called the National Socialist German Democratic Party. They called themselves the Nazis for short. Now, they did not have the swastika as their sign yet. We'll get to how that comes about in a second. So Adolf Hitler is involved in this in some way. And so Adolf Hitler eventually will gain power of the Nazi Party, and then he starts to morph it into what he wants it to be. Okay? So Adolf Hitler is the totalitarian leader of Germany at this time. He will eventually become in charge of the Nazi Reich, or rule. Now, we associate this sign, swastika, which is actually a Native American sign for peace, but we associate it with some of the most horrible things to come about in the 20th century, and that would be the Holocaust and the persecution of the Jews. So Nazism is a form of fascism, and the other big things you understand here are the Aryans and, of course, the Jews. The Aryans were the supreme race, and if you have a supreme race, you have to have somebody beneath them, and that would be the Jews or anybody else. And so he believed in the supremacy of the Aryan race, and he was out to prove that. Now, how does he go about proving this? He decided he was going to overthrow the German government, overthrow Wilhelm the second. And so he goes where they had, Germany, they have beer halls, kind of meeting centers. It's the way it is. I mean, Oktoberfest is from Germany, right? So just roll with me. But he goes into a beer hall, and the plan is to assassinate the people in the party and take control of the government. Well, he fails, and he's put in jail. Now, what is probably the worst possible thing you can do with a crazy man? Let's stick him in a cell and give him time to write down all his crazy ideas. And so that's what Adolf Hitler does. While in jail, he will write a book that is called Mein Kampf, loosely translated to My Struggle. And so what is Adolf Hitler talking about here? What is his struggle? Now, if you've ever read this, this is like the ADD hand guide, because it you know, much like a dog would be like, squirrel, something happened. He would talk about something, and then he would relate it back to his hatred for the Jews, and then he would go to a completely, vastly different topic, and then relate it back to his hatred for the Jews. And in this book, he actually outlines the fact that he wants to round up the world's Jews and get rid of them. Now, he doesn't say through the Holocaust or anything like that, but he does lay it out. And so something we learn here is that if somebody is brave enough maybe to write that information down, maybe they'll carry it out. So we've got to listen, because a lot of people kind of played this off and said, nah, he can't do it. We'll get into more about that once we get into the thing there. Now, the last kind of dictator I want to go into here is an interesting one nonetheless, because they have an emperor, and that would be Japan. Japan's emperor at the time is named Hirohito, and there he is. Now, Emperor Hirohito is more or less kind of a figurehead. He's seen as kind of royalty. You can't upset him. And he goes and appoints a prime minister, and that prime minister is killed by this next guy. And so this next guy is out to make Japan look supreme. Now, if you know anything about Japan, you know they're an island. And so how are you going to do that? You have to go and take stuff over. You have to be imperialistic. And we know from World War I that imperialism leads to war. So Japan is on this very dangerous path. Now, why are they so big and going doing this? Well, two reasons. They beat the two most populous countries in the world in wars in the 1900s. In the Sino-Japanese War, they beat the Chinese and gained Manchuria and Korea to an extent. And in the Russo-Japanese War, they beat Russia. So they're pretty well known for their fighting prowess, etc., and so they think this can happen. So Emperor Hirohito, he's kind of a figurehead. Now, the man who is kind of really in charge of Japan here is named Emperor, or called Prime Minister rather, Hideki Toyo. Now, Hideki Toyo, or Tojo, is the man pulling the strings, and he wants a Japan that is based on military prowess. Now, this is interesting because the Prime Minister right now is a man by the name of Prime Minister Abe, spelled like Abe, but it's Abe. And he's actually doing something similar. He's getting all these things going on. Now, these three countries here do set up totalitarian governments, and eventually, when war breaks out, they will become known as the Axis powers. There we have Nazi Germany flag, we have Italy, which looks strikingly similar to the one now, but they have the Roman cross in the middle, and Japan's flag, it kind of looks kind of cool, right? They have that red sun because it's known as the land of the rising sun, and those little rays coming out, that's called imperialism. You're spreading your light elsewhere. And so the Axis power refers to the union of these three countries. Really happens right around 1939, but we'll get more about that here in a second.